This has actually been a heavily requested video for a while. People look at our gameplay videos and think, that runs so smoothly, before the reality kicks in and they realize we just have very powerful computers. This then invites the question, what MMORPGs can my computer even run? What games can my crappy little PC even handle? Now, back before Wiggy and I had monster PCs, we spent day after day looking for games that could run on our crappy laptops. We had wished at the time that there were lists that could elaborate on games that were still good, games that were populated, worth playing, that didn't crash our computer whenever we tried to boot them up. Now, at the time, which was around the mid-2000s, there were none. The only MMORPG channels were MMO Hut with Omer and OnRPG with... I don't even remember. Neither of which did top 10 lists like people do these days. So in light of that, I wanted to go ahead and make a list compiling some great quality games that will definitely run on low-end computers. A quick note though before the video begins, this video features random footage from our time playing through the games. The footage shown is not definitive of progress made throughout the game. EverQuest is a 3D fantasy MMORPG that released way back in 1999. EverQuest was one of the very first MMORPGs to be released and can be credited with assisting in pioneering the entire genre. Graphically, the game looks very much like it was released in, the early 2000s for the PS2 or Xbox. It kind of reminds me of a less detailed Morrowind or an older Western RPG like Summoner 2. Even so, EverQuest manages to still look better than half a dozen indie games that are released these days that call themselves MMORPGs. Combat is tab target, meaning it isn't in any way action oriented. You click your target, your character fights them, and you can cycle through your skills. The world of EverQuest isn't completely open world. It's like Blade & Soul, I guess, having you occupy individual zones that are separated by loading screens. All in all, EverQuest is still populated enough to enjoy going around and exploring. It may not be the most elegant looking or playing MMORPG, but it will definitely get the job done. Mabinogi is an anime MMORPG released back in 2004. It has a completely unique graphical style never used by any other game that features hand-painted textures stylized with edge detection outlining. Truly, it looks quite impressive. Even though it was released back in 2004, Mabinogi holds up well against other games like Fiesta and Flife, both of which are still alive and kicking today, barely. The combat is tab target, although Mabinogi has a very unique combat style. See, combat is about predicting what skill the enemy is going to use and making use of your own combat skills appropriately. Mabinogi, it employs a very tactical combat style, adding on to how unique the overall game is, requiring careful analysis and timing of what skills to use. Unlike most MMORPGs that have the holy trinity of tank, healer, DPS, Mabinogi has none, having the player instead make use of countering the enemy. It's a very unique style of combat, and I haven't ever seen it done before. The game world, like EverQuest, is instanced. You access each zone through portal. However, the zones you're able to access are insanely huge in size, so large even that it takes literally forever to get around. The game's population, although not large, is still active as the game is worked on every month with new content being pushed out. RuneScape is a 3D fantasy MMORPG released way back in 2001. It has the capability of both being played with a client or as a browser game, but don't let that fool you, it is nothing like any other browser MMORPG out there. Interestingly, RuneScape has more than one current iteration of itself. The updated RuneScape that many people play currently, and old school RuneScape, the version that fans of the game before it got updated play. The combat in RuneScape is tab target. I feel like this entire list is actually going to feature tab target combat games, but nevertheless, RuneScape, although tab target, has a semi-real combat system. See, unlike most MMORPGs, RuneScape's combat system is divided into 3 distinct subcategories: melee, magic, and ranged. Like traditional MMORPGs that utilize a class holy trinity, RuneScape utilizes a combat trinity that more or less governs the effectiveness of each combat style. For example, melee beats ranged, range beats magic, and magic beats melee. This makes for some very interesting combat mechanics, actually. Graphically, RuneScape is a fun, surprisingly good-looking MMORPG, which has to do with the fact that they gave the game a huge makeover in the past. And I will say now, it worked for it. Similarly to what World of Warcraft did with Warlords of Draenor. RuneScape is also one of the most played MMORPGs today. If that doesn't spark an interest in the game, I don't know what will. You'd be surprised how well this one actually runs, many people actually being shocked it's so well optimized. Guild Wars 2 is a 3D fantasy MMORPG released back in 2012, the very best looking game in this list graphically, and probably the most recently released MMORPG in this list as well. Guild Wars 2 features some of the best graphics in MMORPGs. Sure, some people might argue with this, saying it's nothing like Black Desert or Blade and Soul, and they'd be right. It is not, but it does not try to be. It has a very basic graphical style like Final Fantasy XIV, and it utilizes that style to make for a very beautiful and well-optimized experience. Granted, you know, when you have like 200 or so people running around in a zone using all kinds of magic and skills, the game can very well slow down or even lock your computer up, but the likelihood of that happening is actually quite small. Combat in Guild Wars 2 is action combat, so above where I said every MMORPG would likely be tab target, I was wrong. Not only is the combat action-based, but it's also got an incredibly in-depth class system with ridiculous amounts of character customization. It would take minutes to go through how in-depth the class system in Guild Wars 2 is, but suffice it to say, you have weapon-specific skills, there is a class trinity of sorts being damage, support, and control, and you have various ways of customizing your character for combat. The world is also instanced into zones, with each zone being incredibly large and filled with players. It is also one of the 5 most populated MMORPGs currently in 2018, so again, that's pretty insane. Oh, well, hey, back up there for a minute. Before you scroll down and leave a hateful comment, I will preface this by saying I know it is not an MMORPG. Path of Exile is a free-to-play online action role-playing game released in 2013. It isn't an MMORPG, but it is kind of an MMO. One so good that I feel like it needs to be mentioned here. It is the only isometric game in this list and is the only non-MMORPG that I will list here. But the game itself plays so well and looks so good that it needs talked about. Graphically, the game looks very raw, very bloody, very gritty. It's one of the few games I have played that just looks this way. It is definitely the only game outside of, I guess, Requiem I have played that looks like this, and that is an actual MMO. Borrowing from the Diablo games, Path of Exile's combat is very hack and slashy. Very fast, very action-based combat with ridiculous-looking special effects that don't break your computer. The population is also incredibly large, given that it isn't a MOBA or an MMORPG. Neverwinter is a 3D fantasy MMORPG released back in 2013. Right off the bat, you're able to tell Neverwinter is set in the world of Dungeons & Dragons, as it has a very D&D feel to it. For a low-end game that runs this good, it also looks surprisingly good, which could be in part due to the fact that the zones you play in, yes, zones, are relatively small. That isn't a problem though, as there is plenty to do in each. Neverwinter utilizes action combat, and great action combat at that. So far, Wiggy and I, in our around 14 or so hours of playing, have only tried the mage and archer out, but they move fast, they move fluidly, and while offering plenty of flashy special effects to please. Again, since the world is instanced often, much more so than games like RuneScape, or Guild Wars 2, or Mabinogi, the game runs incredibly well. There isn't a whole lot that needs rendering at a given time. Population-wise, the game isn't doing too great, but that is due to how Perfect World Entertainment handles their business models. I'd actually done a review on Star Wars The Old Republic a month or two ago detailing whether or not it was worth playing in 2018, so shameless plug here. Go check that out if you're interested in that. Star Wars The Old Republic, though, was initially released way back in 2011. Yes, it is truly that ancient. One of the only sci-fi MMORPG left outside of EVE, Star Trek, and WildStar off the top of my head, Star Wars The Old Republic absolutely nails the beauty of sci-fi MMORPGs. Although the game looks a little dated, the fact that it captures a lot of what made the Star Wars movie so beautiful to me is a huge bonus. Combat isn't that bad either. It's not great by any means, but you can tell it's a little dated. Uniquely, Star Wars The Old Republic actually features differing classes per faction, each with distinct backstories and branching storylines that are affected by players' moral choices in-game. Morality and choice in Star Wars The Old Republic is by far one of the most engaging parts of it, and you'll experience exactly why it's so interesting when you play it. The world, much like World of Warcraft, is not instanced by any means. The world is contiguous, and so that the planets you are able to traverse are actually accessible through space travel, but they still share the same persistent virtual space as every other planet. Speaking of population, though, Star Wars The Old Republic isn't doing too bad. It's not in the top 10 most populated MMORPGs of 2018, sure, and we have a separate video for that as well, but it is not in too bad a state. Do note that this list is of MMORPGs that will run and are playable on low-end computers. This does not by any means guarantee that they will run perfectly at a crisp 60 FPS. It really is dependent on how bad your computer actually is. Regardless, hopefully this list helps you find a game you're interested in playing. It's something that took us a lot of time and effort to find ourselves.